Hello and welcome to Conversations in Cleantech, the podcast that celebrates the clean tech industry and the people that power it, brought to you by Brightsmith. For our 7th season, we're speaking to clean tech leaders about the process of investing in a cleaner planet. From inspiring stories and words of wisdom to financial forecast and investment insights, you can learn all about the people and companies who are driving these investments and propelling us towards a cleaner, greener tomorrow. I'm your regular host, Jenny Gladman, but this season there's a twist. I'll be taking a few months off to have my second baby, so I'm handing the reins of our podcast over to a series of fellow Brightsmithers who will be Season 7's super co-hosts. So, without further hesitation,
hey everybody, we have a really exciting episode for you today, which is a slightly different point of view on the investing world. We will be speaking to a managing director at a venture capital who doesn't only invest in the clean tech space, but also within health tech and other kind of systematic pillars. I think that this will kind of give us a slightly different insight on this series. So I'm joined here by Hetty, who's just returned from Rotterdam.
I have, and straight back to it with a great podcast.
How are you feeling? A bit tired?
A little bit, but lots of really good conversations. There were 15,000 people at this one this year, which is a bit ridiculous, but great to see.
And remind us what you were doing in Rotterdam?
Yes, for context. So we were over at the World Hydrogen Summit this year. It was our second year at the event, but we actually were fortunate enough to work with the Women in Green Hydrogen Network on this one for their first conference booth, which is a really exciting moment for the network. But yeah, I'm really excited to kind of get back to it and continue the conversation in this podcast today. I think it will be an interesting one for a lot of our partners. It's definitely kind of coming from that other side of the fence, and hopefully you can share a bit more insight as to what VCs are really looking for in their founders and technologies, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into it.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us on Conversations in Cleantech. Today I'm co-hosting this podcast with Alexa.
Hi.
As you know, this series has all been around investment in the clean tech space, and today we have the privilege of being joined by Andrew Beebe, all the way in San Francisco. Andrew is the managing director at Obvious Venture, a ventures capital firm, investing in startups, reimagining trillion-dollar industries through a world positive lens. And he's here to tell us a little bit more about his experience all in this investment world. So, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I guess to kick us off, Andrew, can you tell us a bit about you and your journey into this VC world?
Yeah, sure. Like my partners here at Obvious, I am a former operator. I was a climate entrepreneur in the Wayback Machine back in 2002. I built my first solar company. And just to contextualize for folks, in 2002, the concept of climate tech as an investable category was really non-existent. Climate change was like a thermostat setting, and, Al Gore's movie hadn't come out. It was pretty early days, but I had built a company in the internet era in the 1.0 realm in the late 90s called Big Step here in Silicon Valley. And I really was taken by the power of technology and startups to make a difference in the world and to accelerate important transitions. And that first transition that I was involved with was the integration of all businesses and I think a lot of society into the internet, or vice versa, the internet as a platform for all of those components in the world. And it was very exciting. We started in a realm watching very sort of basic technology, IP6, and these fundamental platform technologies start to embed themselves. And slowly but surely, everyone realized this was not just an interesting kind of way to shoot an email across the world, but also change the way we do business and relate to one another. And that was very, very powerful. I got very excited by that, and so did my co-founders. And we built a really interesting company. And it was then that I first interacted with this concept of venture capital that was also very catalytic in helping people build transformational businesses. So when we sold that business in 2002, I took some time off and thought about what would happen next. What was the next big thing to really, at a very macro level, transform pieces of the global economy. And my mind quickly went from digitization of that economy to decarbonization of that economy. And that was those were early kind of days. I was reading books like Alvin Toffler and the Third Wave and Freeman Dyson and a lot of science fiction about where the world might go. And I learned a lot then about climate and climate impact. And I think just believed that at a very basic level, we were going to move to a world that was cleaner and more sustainable, particularly with power generation, because power generation was reliant on this dwindling or at least more increasingly more expensive resource of fossil fuels, and could be transformed toward a world where we had free fuel sources and just expensive technologies like wind and solar. And so I decided to focus on the solar part of that equation. I believed that if you could drive down the capex and then have no opex, no fuel cost, that was a gambit that was sort of worth using to take on the fossil fuel industry and make power just cheaper and more accessible and ultimately much cleaner. So along the way, I think people started to get the message, thanks to Al Gore and many other great scientists and folks out there trying to make clear what was happening to the planet. And we got swept up in that climate tech, or what we called Cleantech 1.0, and we were able to raise a lot of money from venture capitalists and others, and ultimately had a really interesting ride building a couple of different companies, one successful and one less successful, and then selling that company to what became the largest solar company in the world and being a big part of that solar transformation. And then ultimately, my partners at Obvious came to me and were putting together a different kind of venture firm, one that really focused on profit and purpose, or what I would say is profit because of the purpose of the founders that we were seeking out. And so 10 years ago, they formed Obvious, and right after founding the firm, brought me on to lead all of our focus on planetary health.
Amazing. It sounds like you were very good at kind of spotting the big trends that were about to kick off.
Well, far in advance of when they were really taking off. So timing is everything in venture and in startup land. And sometimes, when your timing is not perfect, persistence becomes the next great tool in your toolkit. And I definitely stuck with it. And so did many other great founders and entrepreneurs and scientists. And I think the founders today are standing on their shoulders for sure.
And it sounds like that solar business was obviously quite a pivotal part of your career, really. So what led you to solar as a technology?
When I looked at what was most likely to become the next sort of category leader or breakout, I looked at a lot of different things. I looked at fuel cells, I looked at hydrogen-based vehicles, flywheels, different types of storage mechanisms, flow batteries, et cetera. And in that exploration, it was clear that there were a lot of interesting technologies out there, many of which just were not going to make it for sort of structural reasons or cost reasons or adoption or fear or incumbency of other technologies that were just superior and would remain that way for a long time. It was also clear to me that solar was artificially expensive, meaning that with scale and with a couple of unlocks like the ability to use non-semiconductor grade silicon in the production of solar panels, we could really radically crush the cost of solar. And when I got involved, we said, our target was $1 a watt. And now people are very familiar with these concepts, but it wasn't even clear to us like exactly what we meant. Was it $1 a watt installed? Was it $1 a watt for the panel? All of these, and what was efficiency and how important was that? We just had a loose idea that if you got to $1 a watt, down from about $10 a watt where we were when we entered, clearly the market could take off. And like any good founder, we would evangelize these ideas and have lots of spreadsheets and explanations of how it would happen. But honestly, we were not sure how it would happen and when it would happen or if it was even humanly possible. And ultimately, the company that I built, we sold to a company called Suntech that was run by a great solar scientist, Shengrong Shi, who was a legend in scaling businesses and lowering the cost of solar. And he said to me at one point, we were doing an interview, I think, for Fortune magazine or something, and he told them very clearly, we're going to be at $1 a watt. And the interview was over, and he turned to me and he said, I have no idea how we're going to get there. And we were nervous. We thought it was possible. Optimistic, to say the least. That said, his passion and the passion of thousands of other people really in leadership roles around the world trying to reduce the cost of solar led us to get to $1 a watt really ahead of schedule And by the time I left, I was running global sales for that business and sold my last year. My team and I sold, $3.5 billion worth of solar panels, up from sort of zero when I started. No one was really selling commercially. And not only had we gotten to $1 a watt, I think we'd gotten to about probably 60 cents a watt by the time I left at the panel level. But today, really, those costs are more like 15 or 20 cents, and the efficiency is nearly double from where we started. So that's not even it's much better than that. And the installed cost today at large scale can be below $1 a watt. So these are shockingly impressive reductions that exceeded our wildest expectations, even from, the best solar scientists and others who were projecting forward how that would get done. And I think that should serve as an inspiration for anyone, whether you're trying to build a better lithium iron phosphate battery or a new, more exotic chemistry, or trying to make, the hydrogen economy work or sustainable aviation fuel. All of these things, this idea that, the cost curves just look really tough, I think that is not constructive thinking for founders. They really have to figure out a little bit of dream and a little bit of imagination, and then a lot of hard science and grit. And ultimately, we can do a lot to move these curves down substantially.
That's amazing. And thank you so much for giving us a bit of insight on your background as well, and also on kind of where the solar industry was at that time. For those who don't know as much about Obvious Ventures, would you be able to give us a bit more context as to kind of what your mission is as a business?
Yeah, of course. As I said, the firm was founded by my partners, James Joaquin, Vishal Vasish, and Ev Williams, who was one of the founders of Twitter and a number of other companies like Blogger before that. Really incredibly accomplished founders themselves, with backgrounds at Apple and Ophoto, and Vishal was the chief strategy officer of Patagonia. Was there 10 years. I still wear clothes that he was the product manager for, which we get a kick out of in the office. And we brought those diverse and exciting operational backgrounds together to build a different kind of venture capital and a different kind of firm. And really, I guess in many ways, we're a traditional venture capital firm. We look for venture returns in seed and A companies. We usually invest something like $3 to $10 million in our first check, and we follow on, and we like to lead deals, and we like to sit on boards and work with founders. So all of that sounds like a pretty traditional early stage Silicon Valley venture firm, and that is true. We do software and hard tech, and so there are some different versions, flavors of the kind of stuff we go after. And we do it across planetary health, human health, and economic health. So it's pretty broad, too. But within each of those, we have key themes. I spend a lot of time on electric mobility and carbon markets and baseload 24/7 clean power. My partners look a lot at tech bio and full stack or outcome-driven healthcare, and then financial empowerment and labor markets. So within these categories, we go deep thematically. And that, too, is a strategy that some venture firms have. I think what's different and what we call world positive venture capital is this idea that you can do all that, and we can look at team, timing, tech, and TAM, and these very sort of structured ways of thinking about venture. But on the team and on the TAM, we really look at places where we think mission-driven founders are going to transform entire portions of the global economy. We would say, like, Ev Williams often says, let's invest in companies that we wish existed in the world, that we want 20 years from now our children and our grandchildren to think of as iconic breakthrough leading companies. And leading to us means leading the world in a better direction. So that's hard. That's a harder filter. And some people would say it's constraining you in ways that you shouldn't be constrained in venture capital. I think that the constraint breeds creativity, and it breeds insight, and that brings us to places that allow us to be a little bit contrarian and a little bit different. So, nearly 10 years ago, we put out a thesis around the electrification of everything and the focus on electric mobility. And today, of course, in hindsight, all great ideas are obvious, and that's the root of the name of the firm. But back then, it was not so obvious. Even Tesla was struggling, and companies like Fisker and others were struggling to prove that you could electrify a vehicle. Famously, Vaclav Smil and other great technologists that people like Bill Gates rely on would write that it was impossible to make electric vehicles economic. And we now know that that's no longer true. And so when we put out a thesis saying buses will be electric, dump trucks will be electric, and maritime vehicles, big ships will be electric, and planes will be electric, this was like heresy and a little bit crazy. And maybe even today there are skeptics out there about this kind of transition. So that's how we would narrow our focus in order, we think, to enlarge the opportunity. And 10 years later, we've invested in over 100 companies. We've had 6 companies go public and more than a dozen, probably 18 companies be acquired. And these are big companies like Recursion Pharmaceutical, which is using artificial intelligence to enhance drug discovery platforms. It's companies like Devoted Health, which is a outcome-driven healthcare company here in the U.S., and these companies are doing, in some cases, billions in revenue and really, I think, transforming their respective domains. And that's what gets us excited in the morning.
That's amazing. And I love to hear about the pillars of investment as well and those key themes. And I know that you mentioned a couple of, I guess, the reasons why you would invest in a company. But what do you feel as though you see within a company that really sets them apart, that makes you think this venture really does have a potential?
I mean, first of all, I should say this is one of the hardest parts, I think, of venture is selecting those teams in pretty short order oftentimes. We love repeat founders that we've worked with in the past. We just backed a team that most of whom had come out of Twitter and the artificial intelligence engineering group there. I had worked with the CEO for many years, over the last 20 years. And when we get to know people like that and we really understand their core values and what they're trying to do, that's easier, and we can know how hard they're going to work. We can know what their motivations are for systemic change and building massive companies that matter. But we also will back first-time founders that we think come from a particular story of their own background and their journey of how they got there and the value set that they're bringing to the company. We spend a lot of time on that, and we work with founders on, what's motivating you, how are you going to embed the values of the companies into the OKRs, into your board development, into the kind of company that you want, because those are the companies that I believe are built to last, that are really going to go the distance. And so, in that 4 quadrants of team, timing, tech, and TAM, I would say, especially on the early stage, we spend the most amount of our time on TAM, which is often pre-done work. It's where we will build a thesis around, electric EV fleet management platforms, which today is a very small TAM, but when every vehicle is electrified and more of them are fleetified or, become parts of fleets, we think that EV fleet management is going to be a massive TAM. So we'll come in with a thesis oftentimes when we meet with these founders. And then those founders, we spend a lot of time listening to their story and the origin story, how they found their co-founders, how they think about team building, and what kind of company they want to build. Because I think a common mistake in venture, and one that we've definitely made, is where an investor will have a vision for what a company should become, and it is, they sort of superimpose that on top of a company instead of looking for that pattern match and making sure that in fact they do not totally, but they align in a way that you could have a shared journey together versus you just wishing that they were aligned with your own take of where the world's going to go.
Definitely. And I think that culture piece is so important in a startup, especially to make sure they grow in the right way, really, right? And obviously you mentioned sort of the EV side and electric vehicle fleets there. What are some of the key technologies or innovations kind of in this clean tech space that you're currently focusing on?
I have been pleasantly surprised regarding the rate of engagement of the global economy regarding electrification across vehicles. So we've done 6 deals in vehicle electrification, 7 in mobility. Companies like Forum Mobility, which are helping drayage operators electrify their fleets. And drayage is the process of taking containers out of ports. So taking them off container ships and getting them to distribution centers. And usually that's a very short haul trip. So 100 miles or 100 and whatever that is, 160 kilometers. And those types of trucks are really ripe for electrification because it's a very short distance. It's a known route. So you don't have to think about the hops that they're going to take across very large distances, which is tricky for electrification of heavy-duty trucking. So Forum Mobility is offering electric trucks and charging depots to those drayage operators. That's a very exciting, very actionable piece of our global supply chain that should be electrified tomorrow. The ports want it. I think that the drayage operators are open to it. They don't really understand how it works. So giving them a complete solution is really core to making this happen faster. I'm also excited about electric flight. We were early investors in Lilium, which is now a public company, and we're no longer an investor in it, but I'm excited that they and Joby and others are getting closer and closer to certification to fly. I think opening up short distance electric flight to a broader and broader portion of the population is a classic example of electrification unlocking new pieces of the economy. It makes it no longer the domain of the rich and famous to fly in helicopters from one city to the next or up to the mountains or wherever you want to get to. It makes it really, really affordable. The cost of an Uber and cleaner and definitely safer than things like helicopters. So that will change not just a quick trip to the airport, but I think it's going to change the way people commute and the way you think about real estate and where you can live versus where you work. So companies like those, I think, are really transformational in the kinds of businesses that we expect to exist in very large scale in the coming decades. So the list goes on. I think we haven't made an investment in maritime or electric boating, but that's a domain that will be electrified for sure. And then energy storage is, I think, a critical missing piece today in terms of large scale seasonal storage, things that can store like a month worth of power. In stationary ways, companies like Form, we're not an investor in Form Energy, but it's a really interesting company, and I think there will be other competitors to that. And then baseload power was something that I was not that excited about when I first came to Obvious because I felt like wind and solar were working, especially when coupled with storage. But in fact, wind and solar, while the component parts are becoming much more cost effective or affordable, the actual process of siting and transmitting large amounts of baseload power has gotten more challenging, at least more expensive from wind and solar. And so I think the opportunity for things like geothermal, possibly nuclear fission and nuclear fusion are really coming more into focus now. For our view, I think fusion is still too far away to make it venture applicable. We have a lot of colleagues in the venture world who disagree with that and are investing, and I think that's great. I hope they're right and I'm wrong. It would be great to see that come to fruition sooner. But nuclear fission, for sure, I feel much more confident in the near term, and I'm hopeful that we see a real renaissance in that category that could be supported by at least the venture community.
I know that you also mentioned investment within the carbon market. And as that is kind of my area of specialties as well, I'd be really interested to understand from your end what you see as the opportunity within that, just because it is such a small space that's constantly changing and there are so many different players involved in that.
Yeah, I am cautiously optimistic about where we are in the Gartner hype cycle, something I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with. But in venture, we think a lot about the Gartner hype cycle and where is the right place to invest. And in that hype cycle, a lot of people, I think, would think, well, you get way ahead of something before the rest of the world even gets excited about it. That's a great place to invest because it may be affordable as a point of entry. I think that's fair. That's maybe second best place to invest. But where I am always excited is after the hype cycle has peaked out and everyone has said, oh my God, this is amazing. And usually you have a trough of disillusionment where things are not quite what they thought. And in fact, everyone decides, our hopes are dashed. This is not going to work. A lot of companies will go out of business during that period. I think this happened in autonomous vehicles. We had an extraordinary hype cycle. And now I think very much we're in the trough of disillusionment. And I think that trough is a great place to invest if you believe in the long-term vision. If you believe that, in fact, the original vision was accurate, then what we've done during that hype cycle is invested a lot. We've educated a lot of founders and engineers and even big companies, and a lot of attention was put on it. And therefore, you have a ready-made group of people who want to go build it out. But the capital is gone and dried up, and a lot of the hopes are dashed. I think that's an interesting time to invest. The gritty people who are true believers are going to stick with it, and a lot of the tech stack is now there and ready to go. I think that carbon markets, voluntary carbon markets, are probably in the trough right now. It's a very difficult place to call. Are you at the bottom? Are you entering it? Are you still sliding down this hill of terror that everyone hates because it just feels like, wow, it's all over. We were wrong. Or are you sort of climbing out a little bit? Timing that specifically is very, very difficult, but I think we're somewhere in there in voluntary carbon markets. And I say that because, like the Guardian article last year really pointing out some of the challenges of doing this with integrity and doing it in a way that makes these offsets or credits really believable is very, very difficult. However, I think the market reacted to that, heard those critiques, was aware of them already, but really smarted from the pain of that kind of critique publicly and has adjusted. And we're investors in a great company called Senken, based in Germany, and you may know it. And they're very focused on building a high-integrity, transparent marketplace for mainly carbon removal credits, which are oftentimes, they're not beyond reproach, but they are easier to really categorize as truly additional and beneficial to the entire system. And therefore, they have higher values usually associated with them. And I think that starting from that point of removal credits, we can dig out of this trough of disillusionment and show people that these things have real value. Indeed, the IPCC and Science-Based Targets Initiative and others have all pointed out that, in fact, we need these offsets and removals as a piece of the overall pie. And when they say need and they forecast forward, it's pretty clear this is at least hundreds of billions of dollars market on the voluntary side, or maybe more and more compliance market, meaning mandatory markets, because regulations come in to just say, hey, enough of this, we're just going to mandate these things, as has happened in Europe to some degree. So I think that the voluntary side or the future additional mandated side should produce a lot of vibrant companies and opportunities. But we're in a darker place today, I think, than we were 4 years ago, or a less optimistic place. And therefore, I think that this is a really interesting time to get into that area.
And I guess as someone who's been in this space and had a really interesting career in the VC world, but also the clean tech sector, what would be your advice or I guess tokens of wisdom for someone looking to embark a career like yours?
I have been a venture capitalist for 9 years, which is really sort of coming out of training wheels and moving into a real career arc. It takes a long time, I think. I think Vinod Khosla famously said it takes something like 70 million in 10 years to build a venture capitalist. So maybe I'm still in the initial phase of that. And with inflation, it's probably 200 million these days. He said it a while ago. But my career also before that, for almost 20 years, was building companies. And we're biased at Obvious. We think that that's a great place to start for venture capitalists. But certainly, I mean, Mike Moritz, one of the best, was a journalist, and Bill Gurley at Benchmark was a banking analyst. So there are many pathways to venture. The one I know best and the one that I have a lot of appreciation for is being a founder first. It's helpful. You can look at founders in the eyes and say, look, I've done this. I've been in your shoes. I've pitched companies. Everybody's story is different, but there's some commonalities that you have as a founder of venture back. I was always venture backed. And I think that that has really informed, for sure, it's informed my methods and the way I interact with founders. But it has also, I hope, helped me be more empathetic and build connection to these founders once we, both in our chase of them, but then also once we invest and be, and act as partners with them on their boards and helping them build their companies. So go build companies.
Yeah.
Amazing. And do you also have any kind of final thoughts that you would like to share with our listeners who are passionate about sustainability and clean tech and looking to kind of step into this space?
every piece of the global economy goes through cycles, and every sector goes through cycles, every profession goes through cycles. So I don't want to pretend that it's up and to the right from here, but climate and climate tech, it's like a geologic cycle. It doesn't suddenly go away. It goes away because of the next few decades of transformation. We are, just like we digitize the global economy, we're going to decarbonize it over 20 years. But in doing so, we're just going to make it better. It's not just like get rid of the bad thing. It's make it better in every way. I mean, if you've ever driven a Tesla, it's just better in every way. Forgiving the CEO, it's really just a better vehicle. It's a better product. And when you're I was in an electric boat the other day. It's an amazing product. When you think across the speed and cost at which we can deliver clean, renewable power now, these things are just better products. So we're about to radically improve we are in the process of radically improving the global economy again, and there will be opportunities everywhere. There will also be momentary dips across it. So with that caveat, I would just say, 20 years ago, 22 years ago, I built my first solar company. And it was rough because not many people were paying attention. Venture capitalists wouldn't take my calls. They would tell me, if you want to build a mobile gaming company, we'll give you millions of dollars. But this solar thing, many of them famously said to me, this solar thing will never happen in venture. And of course, like 3 years later, they were all writing $100 million checks. But it was lonely. And it was also lonely in finding engineers and marketing people and salespeople and co-founders. It was not easy at all. So it was an intrepid few back then who did it. Times are different now, and that may sound like it's crowded or whatever. It's so much better now because you can go. There's a great company in the UK that I met with, Hived, that I think is doing clean delivery in London. And like, if you look at every little nook and cranny across the economy, there's something to be done, and there are co-founders ready to do it with you. So if you're a marketing person or a PR person or an HR person, and you want to get involved, there's a way to do it. You don't need to be a nuclear physicist to make these things happen. And that's it. That's like special. And so put in another way, there's no excuses anymore. If you want to marry your sense of purpose and your values with the opportunity to make money and possibly make huge amounts of money and really build transformational companies, you now have that opportunity. So I wouldn't squander that. I like the idea of going. I was speaking at a business school recently, and people were telling me they're going, back to consulting and back to banking, and it was just really disappointing to me. I don't, if you want to do that, if you've got some reason to do that, okay, but like student debt or something is no longer a reason to do that, because there are great paying jobs in these transformational pieces of the economy. So you can match your values with your intent financially or stability-wise or risk-wise, and go for it. And I would encourage everyone out there, if you've got that idea, or even if you don't have that idea but you're seeking, go for it, because it's easier than ever to take these risks.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Andrew. Everything you've said and all of the insight that you've given is so valuable. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Yeah, Hetty and Alexa, it's great to hang out with you. Thanks.